Well, hello, everybody. My name is David Leese, and I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. And a warm welcome to everybody in our audience, and of course, our guest, John Carpay. And I wanted to, of course, hope and pray that everyone's having a great new year in 2024 as we look to the year with anticipation. There are certainly many issues that we face in our country, and we certainly wish everyone a great new year. Today, we're going to talk about a follow up to an extraordinary interview that I think I had with you, John, and your colleague Marty Moore at the Justice Center, and a warm welcome to you, John. Thank you for joining us today on live.
Happy New Year. Glad to be with you.
Well, John, it's great to see you, and it's interesting. The interview was released this Tuesday, and I will tell you that we got quite a response, a very positive one to the topics that were covered, and it's quite interesting. One gentleman reached out to me and texted me, and among so many others, and said, for him, it was a revelation to talk about rights and freedoms looking back the last several years. And he said to me, I didn't realize that on so many fronts, there's very important issues around rights and freedoms that are really being undermined. And I think, as I listened to the interview with you, John, I had a kind of a similar feeling as well. And I know one of the questions I asked you was, how do you view things in retrospect the last 5 years? And you had a very interesting response, and that was, no, I don't think if I don't want to. You can speak better for yourself than I can, but I think you said a very powerful statement. You said, "No, I don't think I would imagine we'd be where we're at as a country 5 years ago." So, are you hoping for a much better 24? Are you cautiously optimistic, John, that things are turning, or is it too early to say?
Well, things might be turning around. I see far more pushback against the imposition of woke ideology on in schools and on students. Canadians are nice and polite, and most Canadians are terrified of anybody publicly accusing them as being hateful or transphobic, homophobic, racist, whatever. And so I think a lot of people have been very intimidated in the past decade, where you cannot speak freely about Aboriginal issues or immigration or gay rights or transgender issues, feminism, various kinds of feminism and different beliefs. There's been all these taboo topics that a lot of people are terrified to discuss publicly. And I see a bit of a shift where people are saying, cutting off healthy body parts of young men and young women is not gender affirming care. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to stand for it. And so there is some pushback where more and more Canadians are realizing that if you cherish the free society, you have to exercise your charter freedom of expression. If you don't exercise it, it becomes worthless. By way of analogy, it's like a muscle, right? The more you exercise your muscles, the stronger that they become. But if you spend your entire life on the couch watching TV, all of your muscles are going to slowly weaken and atrophy. So I see a bit of a turnaround, that there's more people now that they're willing to call a spade and say, no more, this is nonsense. Call me all the names you want, but I'm going to stand up for protecting our adolescents and teenagers from transgender ideology. You can call me whatever name you want in the book, but I'm going to stand up for that. And I hope that same attitude will transpose or morph into all kinds of areas of public policy, because the only way we can have good laws in this country is to have healthy debate and frank discussion about public policy. And if we don't have that, we're far less likely to end up with good laws if we don't have the healthy debate.
I think you're right on. I like your powerful analogy, John. Our rights and freedoms are like our body. We need to exercise them. Otherwise, we atrophy, we lose them. So I think that's a very good analogy. And so what do you think? As I look to the audience, both on live with Twitter, pardon me, X, Elon Musk would be horrified. if I use that word, but on X and of course on YouTube. So a warm welcome to our audience. We'd love to hear from you. One of the things that's really been fantastic, and we've only had the live discussion the last several weeks, but the audience continues to grow in the positive feedback. So we'd love to hear from you and make sure that you subscribe to all our social media platforms and see our website. We'd love to hear from you. So, what do you think? Do you think our rights and freedoms are going, dare I say, going quietly into the night? Or are we going to exercise those rights and freedoms as John Carpay spoke about? So, as we get kind of wound up in the discussion here, and we've got so much to talk about, it's almost overwhelming. But, John, can you tell us what is the role of the Justice Center? What do you really do in terms of the mission of the center?
So, Justice Center is Canada's leading defender of charter rights and freedoms. We have a team of lawyers across the country. We currently have about 150 cases, although that number is actually decreasing because many of these were cases where somebody was issued, a $5,000 fine for not using the ArriveCan app when coming back into Canada, or William Vogelsang, a teenager in Ottawa, 17 at the time, issued an $800 ticket for playing basketball outside alone. So we've got about 150 cases that we're supporting and providing lawyers for across Canada, but I think by year's end it'll be below 100, but still quite a few. And the two main areas that we work in, one is litigation, which is our court actions. So we provide legal representation to Canadians whose human rights, charter freedoms, civil liberties are being violated by government or by a government body, like a school board or a university or a law society or what have you. And the other big area is we educate Canadians about charter rights and freedoms. And to that end, we have released 2 reports on the dangers of centralized digital ID. I anticipate that later this year, we will be issuing reports about the dangers of central bank digital currency. And we're also developing a charter curriculum for high school students. And we've released the first module on freedom of expression. And coming up in the next few months, we'll have another module released on either conscience and religion or freedom of association or peaceful assembly. One of those 3, probably conscience and religion, which is the very first right that is enumerated in the Charter.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, the center does terrific work, and we'll, of course, have to have you on again. John, you've been on a number of times with our discussions, but certainly about those reports about what's it called again? Oh, yes, digital currency. And we'll certainly ask you about that in a moment, but also regarding that sounds like very exciting things, is teaching the next generation about rights and freedoms. That seems to me like that's, again, exercising our rights and freedoms so we don't take them for granted. So bravo. So, John, I did have a quick question then. And I apologize, the gentleman who was playing basketball by himself who got ticketed, what was his name?
William Vogelsang.
Okay, so if William Vogelsang hadn't come to your attention, like so many hundreds and hundreds of other cases, if you didn't exist, where would those cases go? What would happen to them?
Well, sadly, there were many Canadians that received no legal representation and simply paid their fine. With William Vogelsang, by the way, we had the ticket we succeeded in getting the ticket withdrawn.
Oh, great. Excellent.
Kudos to another group called the Democracy Fund. To their credit, they also took on, they had Fight the Fines, and they had hundreds, I believe it was hundreds of cases. And then the Justice Center also hundreds of cases. So between the Justice Center and the Democracy Fund, we were able to assist hundreds and hundreds of people and getting better outcomes. Some cases we took to trial. Some of those we won, some of those we lost. Majority of the cases we negotiated a settlement, or we persuaded the Crown to withdraw the charges. In some cases, with the consent of the client, we negotiated that they would their penalty would be making a $50 donation to charity rather than paying $1,000 fine. And sadly, I would venture a guess that for every person that got legal representation, there would have been at least one, maybe 2 or 3 or more others that did not. And so we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, wow. No, it's a big job, John, and we're grateful that you and your team are there, among other groups as well. Like the Democracy Fund you mentioned, are working away at these issues. It's very, very important. What struck me about our conversation as well is that it almost seems like a full court press when it comes to the erosion of our rights and freedoms. It's almost like every area of our society is under attack. And another one came to my attention this past week was the case about Dr. David Jacobs. And I don't think you're involved in this file, but he, pardon me, my apologies, is waging a online campaign to get people to fill out the consultation form regarding some medical agencies. And my point is that they're also attacking professional associations. I think of the case of Dr. Jordan Peterson as a well-known one. But this fellow, Dr. David Jacobs, is saying the report that is being proposed for medical practice is, quote, in his words, bonkers. And basically, he says, make no mistake, this is political. Social justice has come to define the political left by trying to supplant medical expertise with social justice. This small group of unelected doctors are trying to insert politics into the therapeutic relationship between a doctor and a patient. And isn't that kind of the epitome of what's going on, John? Is you have this group, this set of ideological activists and groups that want to insert their politics in everybody else's lives. They can't just let us live our lives. Am I being too simplistic in this, John? How do you see things?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and we've seen severe politicization of medicine since 2020, since March of 2020 with lockdowns. Prior to 2020, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and there is one in every province, probably the territories as well, the College of Physicians and Surgeons focused on ethics. So, for example, it's unethical for a doctor to have sex with his patients. It's unethical for a doctor to be rude to his patients, right? So if you had a doctor that was really rude to you or kept you in the dark or, failed or refused to give you proper information, or a doctor who pressured you into getting a vaccine without giving you the full facts, all of that would be unethical pre-2020, and you could file a complaint with the college and they would they would investigate and potentially pursue disciplinary proceedings against doctors. What the College of Physicians and Surgeons did not do was insert itself into medical debates. I could probably think of a dozen examples, but I'll give you two. About a decade ago, there was a controversial new therapy for multiple sclerosis, and it was called liberation therapy. And there was an Italian doctor who developed this. And there is heated debate. Some people said it was fantastic and a high success rate. Other people said it was just useless. And other people said, oh, it's worse than useless. It's harmful. You shouldn't do it. Another example, anti-cholesterol medication. Some doctors are fans. Some doctors say, no, the side effects are worse. The cure is worse than the disease. The college did not get into medical debates until after 2020, when the college informed doctors across the colleges informed doctors across Canada. And sometimes the language it was veiled, it was diplomatic, but you could clearly see the threat there. That if you, in your professional medical opinion, if you think that lockdowns are useless for stopping the spread of the virus, if that's your medical or scientific opinion, you better shut up, or you could risk losing your license. If you do not encourage your patients to take the vaccine, you could lose your license. If you yourself as a medical professional think that the vaccine is not safe and not effective, you cannot share that opinion with your patients. And so the colleges have been anti-science. Because science is predicated on the idea that we're all searching truth together and we engage in debate. So this is a serious problem in Canada, that the colleges of physicians, teachers, psychologists, associations of engineers, law societies are cracking down on speech, and they are imposing ideology, and it's extremely disconcerting.
Wow. That is kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? I would never have thought we'd see the day in Canada where you have so-called professional associations weigh in with ideology. Because, I think that, you're making a very important point here, John, that there's something deeper going on here. And the laws are reflecting that kind of iceberg effect beneath the surface where you have ideologues weighing in. And I think the stunning contradiction is you really can't do science if you're not open-minded. You need to be open-minded to do science. And so physicians are, a special profession, and that their work involves science. And I think you gave in our interview that was released, and if you haven't seen it, make sure you look at it. You gave the really powerful example, and I'm trying to remember the physician who advocated hand washing of all things years ago. So let's, you were making the point that she was asserting that it's important to wash, your hands before you do surgery of all things, and that somehow she was mocked and ridiculed. So if I mean,
But I would
the same.
venture a guess she was not silenced by the College of Physicians and Surgeons,
Yeah,
because that's entirely different. If people mock you and ridicule you, that, don't get me wrong, that's not the best. I'm not saying that's the scientific approach.
sure,
We shouldn't
sure.
mock and ridicule. We should come up with credible counter arguments.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
there's a huge difference between being the first person, the only person to come out with an idea, and the whole world says that's stupid, that's silly. Okay, that's the give and take, the cut and thrust of free speech. And you might have most people saying that you're wrong or you're stupid or whatever. It's very different when you've got a governing body that is threatening to take away your license to practice medicine. And so this female physician, because so many women were dying after childbirth because doctors were not washing their hands. And then she said, wash your hands before you deliver a baby. And when her idea was eventually adopted, the rate of women dying after giving birth, it declined hugely.
Right. Yeah. No, this is
But
outrageous.
this is the power thing. So I mean, where the Justice Center is fighting the battle is that we will, I'll give you an example. A nurse in British Columbia, Amy Ham, has been prosecuted for 3 years. The prosecution is finally concluded, and we're now waiting for a decision. For 3 years, she's been prosecuted, subjected to disciplinary hearings for having stated publicly that there are only two genders and that women are entitled to safe female-only places like bathrooms, change rooms, locker rooms, rape crisis centers. So we're providing the lawyers for Amy Ham, and so our focus will be on fighting these professional associations, but ordinary citizens can speak up, because I do think that these associations, they have to care. They claim to be fighting for the public interest, right? The Law Society, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, they all say, "Oh, we're all about protecting the public." They will take at least some notice, maybe a lot of notice, of what average grassroots citizens are saying about their behavior.
But this sounds like doublespeak to me. And if you ask, what is it, 85, 90% of Canadians, they would say, yeah, there's two genders. And, all the best to people who are maybe confused about it. Okay, fine, but that's your private business. But don't impose that ideological nonsense on the rest of us. Like, when somebody wants to see their physician, don't they want to see a physician who does their job? They don't want to meet with some kind of ideologue. It's just bizarre. And I think what you're onto, John, is a very important point, because ultimately it's these professions, and I use this word deliberately, they have a very privileged position in our society, and they've been granted that by the provinces, the respective provinces or government, to kind of self-regulate and govern themselves. But if they act like this, don't they risk losing every scrap of trust the public has in them?
Sadly, yes. And I think that process has started. I think that there's still, just a guess on my part, I don't know. I think there's still a great deal of public confidence in colleges of physicians and surgeons and perhaps even law societies, but it is rapidly eroding. Another really crucial example that many people will remember is that when there were anti-lockdown protests in 2020, the medical establishment said that was, a terrible risk of spreading the virus. when there were anti-racism protests with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people standing side by side, marching side by side. To my knowledge, there's not a single medical authority in Canada, neither a College of Physicians and Surgeons nor a chief medical officer in a particular province, that denounced these protests as being dangerous. So the message is loud and clear. If you're protesting outdoors against lockdowns, well, that's really dangerous. You're putting everybody's lives at risk, and shame on you.
John, I don't want people to miss that. So you're saying that there are these lockdowns, and you can have a debate that made any sense whatsoever. But what happened is that they had these so-called BLM protests, right? But people said, no, from a health point of view, that's okay to go out there and do that. So it's just contradiction after contradiction here. That's your point, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, it just becomes farcical. And I think they're catching on to this slowly but surely, but it's tough slugging because you have kind of the major media players are all on the government dime. Like have they just become Pravdas? Like, as you look at the mainstream media as I do, and I'm just shocked by the level of coverage or lack thereof around these issues.
Well, Dr. Jordan Peterson, when he received from the Justice Center the George Jonas Freedom Award in June of 2023, during his remarks, he was asked about the mainstream media, how can they ever regain the trust of people? And Jordan Peterson said, they're dead. Their viewership is declining. He pointed out that the numbers, CNN was describing Joe Rogan, the podcaster, as fringe, when Joe Rogan has more listeners than CNN.
Yeah.
CNN includes with its viewership people walking through airports, because CNN is on TVs and airports, and they actually count those. They count those as viewership numbers. All these people at airports that are walking by a TV screen are counted as CNN viewers. So the government-funded media are dying a well-deserved death. They have not acted with integrity, especially in the last 3 years. They've not reported. The only thing they've reported on is the government narrative. They've promoted the government narrative. They've suppressed facts that a journalist with integrity would include both sides, would include miscellaneous facts, would allow the reader to make up her own mind. They haven't done that. So what I see is a growth in the Rebel and True North and the Counter Signal and the Epoch Times and the Western Standard and others. Yeah. They're all growing, and fewer and fewer Canadians are listening to the CBC and other government-funded media.
Yeah, and the National Post does carry quite a bit of good stuff as well. But beyond that, it's pretty slim pickings. It's kind of bizarre. And what I didn't fully realize, or I may certainly know this now, but the amount of funding that the federal government does is widespread and deep. So it's not just a handful of media outlets. It's over 2,000 media outlets across Canada. So they're funding just about anything that moves. And the amount of funding increased now just this last month with the last federal budget. So they're doubling down and they're zeroing in. And this is a point that you brought up in the interview, John, is they're doubling down on trying to control the internet and even podcasts. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And that's critical, right? Because without open information and healthy debate, your democracy is fading right before our eyes. Am I being too histrionic, John?
No, in most political change is step by step, incremental, slowly, and that's the same for the loss of our charter rights and freedoms. So the government's not going to pass a law that says, effective February 1st, 2024, every blog and every website has to be registered with the government, and you have to provide a report on your content, and you have to sign a statement saying that you'll support diversity, equity, inclusion.
Wow.
Like that, the government's not going to pass a law saying, here's the law starting February 1st. What they do is it's slowly and it's sneaky and it's very scary. The federal government has expanded the powers of the CRTC to control platforms on which podcasts are hosted. And so the government says, and this is it's accurately, it's a kernel of truth in a bigger lie. The kernel of truth is the federal government will say, we're not controlling podcasts. We're not saying what you can and cannot say. However, by controlling the platforms and by expanding the powers of the CRTC, as has been done, the CRTC can say, well, we've got some new policies. We want everybody to sign an attestation saying that your podcast is going to align with the goals of equity, diversity, inclusion. Or we're going to want you to sign a statement saying that you repudiate racism, homophobia, and transphobia. Whatever. You're going to have these impositions, and so it's a slow, incremental, step by step. And so we need courageous people that are going to stand up for their charter rights and freedoms in the same way when the provincial medical officers declared that it was illegal to hold an outdoor protest. That's in blatant violation of charter freedoms. And kudos to the people that went and protested outdoors against a policy that obviously has no scientific basis. So we're going to need, if we want to turn things around in Canada, we're going to need a lot of courage to speak truth to power and to simply continue exercising our freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly, continue to exercise those freedoms, even when it becomes difficult.
Okay, so let's just make sure we don't lose that headline. When the government funds our media now in Canada, they don't get you to sign, or at least I'd love to see the agreement that they receive as media when they get the money. But they don't necessarily, they don't have to sign an agreement per se about what exactly, how they're going to report the news per se. But they have to sign a code of conduct. Is that what you're saying, John?
Well, what I'm saying is that, and the government funding of media is one thing, and the expanded powers of the CRTC, the Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission, I'm not sure if I'm getting it right. I'm used to saying CRTC. The CRTC now has expanded powers to control and regulate podcasts. And what I predict is going to happen is that the first step will be, if you have a podcast, you have to just register your podcast. You don't have to sign a statement refusing to comply with certain criteria. But then the next thing will be, well, you have to file an annual report. So not just register, but file an annual report. And then the next step after that is going to be, you have to agree to have your content align with certain important Canadian values like equity, diversity, inclusion. And so it's a step-by-step process that the
thin edge of the wedge, John, right? So this is what totalitarian regimes have done through all history. And that's not an understatement or overstatement, pardon me, when we look at this issue. So stay tuned on that issue. This is a very important issue, isn't it, John? So in light of this context, although we do have an independent media that is arising, so a key action is, if you're a citizen, which we all are, support them and speak up. Like, tell your elected officials, this is preposterous. Like, this funding needs to end now, doesn't it?
The sooner the better. And indeed, it's easy to agree philosophically that we need to support independent media, but I would encourage our viewers and listeners, dig into your own pocket, go to The Rebel, True North, Counter Signal, Epoch Times, Western Standard, and pay $8 a month, $6 a month, $10 a month, and sign up, and give them your $50. Right. Because that's really going to make a difference. If there's an additional 100 people today that subscribe to, even one of those 5. I mean, if you can afford it, subscribe to all 5. Yeah, and there's others as well. I don't mean to,
and don't forget this, the mother ship that we're part of here is the Return to Reason lineup and the Miracle Channel and the Corco on demand thing. So I would argue that if you aren't putting some money into this, you're part of the problem, right? You really can't be neutral on this issue, can you, John?
No, I think, unless you're literally living from hand to mouth and not able to put food on your table, I think there's no excuse for not, putting out $50 a year to subscribe to one of the independent media outlets.
Yeah, no, well said. I have a question then, and call it the kind of maybe the fork in the roads question. We have 2024. We're at the beginning of this year. And I just want to pick up on that thread. Are you more optimistic or kind of pessimistic? Like, do you see it as a situation where it's going to be really tough to turn this situation around. And I don't mean to put you in the spot, John. I mean, you're the president of the Justice Center, but you see kind of what's going on across the country. You see a lot of these files. What is it going to get worse before it gets better? Do you have any sense of that?
I always try to avoid making predictions about the future. I really don't know. The future is always surprising. Even with our court cases, we have won cases that we think that we were going to lose, and we've lost cases that we thought we were going to win. I would say there's a strong possibility that things will get worse before they get better, but we are in a privileged position. If let's compare us to modern day theocratic Iran, theocratic Saudi Arabia, China, North Korea. We could mention dozens and dozens of countries with repressive regimes, and historical examples. You've got Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's communist China, Pol Pot's Cambodia. In all of these repressive regimes, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Are they fascist? Are they Nazi? Are they communist? Are they theocratic? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. That's more of a exterior coating. But at the core, they're all repressive regimes. We have it so easy because in other countries, if you speak out against the regime, or if you demonstrate for freedom of religion or freedom of expression, or if you try to exercise your freedom of association, you literally risk death or imprisonment, torture, etc. We're in a privileged position in Canada where, the worst thing that's going to happen to you, for most people, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to be subjected to name calling, and people will say that you're hateful and homophobic and racist and transphobic. And that's the worst. So really, we have no excuse for not exercising our freedom of expression when that is pretty much the only penalty. We're not risking imprisonment. Well, actually, I have to take that back. Sorry. Tamara Leach is an example of someone who engaged peacefully in peaceful protest in Ottawa and spent a total of 49 days in jail. Chris Barber, for whom Justice Center is providing lawyers, spent time in jail. So there was a heavy price paid by those people, and a heavy price paid in Canada by people who lost their jobs by refusing to get injected with the COVID vaccine. So there's a higher price that some people are paying, but for most people, it's not a job loss. It's just being subjected to name calling on the internet.
Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. It sounds like you're kind of optimistic, but you're kind of being realistic, dare I say, in terms of the heavy lifting and hard work that needs to be done here to turn things around, but it's not a given.
Well, this is why I can't make a prediction, because it's in the hands of Canadians, including people watching or listening to this video cast. That it's in individuals' hands. When you're confronted, when you have an opportunity to exercise your freedom of expression, and what needs to be said, and it might not be popular, are you going to take the easy way out and remain silent, or are you going to speak up? When your employer in the workplace is violating your freedom of conscience or religion by asking you to do something that goes against your conscience, are you going to acquiesce, or are you going to stand up? So it's really up to Canadians whether things will get worse before they get better, which I think is likely. That need not be the case if people exercise their freedoms of expression, conscience, religion, association, and peaceful assembly.
Right on. I have two questions. One is, if I have a case, how do I get it to the Justice Center for possible action? And then the second question is, are they making an unfair example of Chris Barber and Tamara Leach?
That first question is a little bit easier. Our website, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, is JCCF. So the website is www.jccf.freedom.ca. And there's an icon there that says Get Help or Get Legal Help. And you click on that. And there's a form to fill out. It's private and confidential. It's reviewed by our legal team. It doesn't go any further. It doesn't go anywhere else. Unfortunately, we have to say no to the majority of incoming requests because of limited resources. Because we're making it possible for 9 full-time lawyers across Canada to be working on this full-time, which sounds like a lot, but in a country of 40 million people, 9 lawyers and 5 paralegals is actually, it's way too low of a number. And we don't charge clients for the legal representation. And 100% of our funding, like the Frontier Center, we're 100% funded by voluntary donations. So, but if you want legal help, there, go to www.jccf.ca. Regarding Chris Barber, it's so sad to see and Tamara Leach. The Justice Center has provided lawyers for both. For Chris Barber, we're handling his criminal defense, and for Tamara Leach, we're acting for her and we're providing lawyers for her and for other people in a class action lawsuit. There's some Ottawa residents that want $290 million in damages over lost sleep, so we've taken that on as well.
Can you repeat that, John?
There's a bureaucrat in Ottawa named Zexi Lee, and she and some other downtown Ottawa residents are suing Tamara Leach and a bunch of other people over for $290 million because they lost some sleep during the truckers' protest. So
Unbelievable. So the question was, are they really making an unfair example of them? Like, does this, I guess the question is really, does this case have any shred of merit to it? Is it just a kind of a nothing burger? It's all for political optics.
I think you've described it quite fairly.
Was that right?
What's really sad is that periodically you will hear Crown prosecutors in Ontario and other people will complain about how there's the Crown does not have adequate resources to ensure that people who have been charged with murder, with rape, with aggravated assault, they are not going to trial. They're walking away scot-free without a trial because the Crown does not have enough resources to see to it that these people get their trial within 30 months, because the Supreme Court of Canada, in a decision from 2016 called R versus Jordan, the Supreme Court of Canada said that if you're charged with a serious offense, murder, rape, aggravated assault, you have a charter right to a trial within 30 months. So the Crown in Ontario does not have enough resources to get people charged with sexual assault to get to trial within 30 months. At the same time, they have launched this massive trial that's gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks. 30 trial days or 32 trial days at last count, more to come in 2024. They're committing massive resources to prosecuting Chris Barber and Tamara Leach. And it's just outrageous.
This is worth tens of millions of dollars they're blowing out the chute to go after people, and they have a nothing case. Is that the bottom line?
Look, I don't practice criminal defense, and I'm not their lawyer, but I would say that look, my own opinion, for whatever it's worth, is the Crown does not have a strong case. Is it an absolute nothing burger? Yeah. Well, there's a few straws that they can grasp at. There's a case from about 15 years ago during the G20 summit where some protesters blockaded a highway, and they were charged criminally, and they were found guilty. I forget which section of the criminal code. So there is a precedent that if a bunch of people block a highway, they could be criminally charged and convicted of a crime. Okay. But what I know from the Freedom Convoy protests in Ottawa 2 years ago was that the protesters, they probably parked their vehicles illegally, contrary to the municipal bylaws, but they did always leave. There was always one lane open for emergency vehicles. So if the Crown is trying to extrapolate, I don't know how successful they're going to be.
Yeah, so we'll have to stay tuned. But in all fairness, I think one of the things that struck me about those protesters was that they worked with the city of Ottawa, the police. They had a pretty collegial relationship. This is from people I know were right on the scene, talking with it and seeing it. They were working collegially, and gosh, this is Canada. That's the way it should be. But you could still protest, you could still make your point and carry on. So I think one of the things that really bothers me about this is we talked about the politicization of professions, John, is you see these unique cabinet positions, attorney general, ministers of justice. It sounds like they're taking on a pretty political, ham-fisted approach to politicizing the law. And this is in the realm of lawfare. And this is a highly developed, despicable realm where people use the law as a cudgel, a weapon against your political opponents. I think that's what's going on here, is it not, John?
Well, sadly, yes. And another tragic example of that was the vandalism of a statue of Queen Victoria at the legislature in Winnipeg, Manitoba,
Yeah,
in July of
exactly.
2021. It is a criminal offense to destroy or vandalize somebody else's property. If you want to vandalize or destroy your own property, that's perfectly legal. But it's actually a crime to vandalize property. And so here we have a statue of Queen Victoria at the legislature in Manitoba, and a bunch of protesters with police standing by and watching, and everybody's recording this on YouTube. The police and the Crown prosecutors, they know who did this. And they took some ropes and chains and pulled down the statue, which, by the way, was very dangerous because it was about 6, 8, 10 feet above the ground and a big heavy statue. Right. And it's a good thing that nobody got hurt. The statue would have killed you if it had landed on you. So, but aside from that, it was blatantly criminal conduct. And the Crown prosecutors in Manitoba said, we're not going to prosecute. Why?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't say why, but we all know why. It's because they were protesting for a politically correct cause. They were probably protesting against colonialism, whatever that means. And we're all supposed to believe that. And it's political.
It's outrageous. It's outrageous because they're introducing a double standard of law, and shame on those prosecutors. It's just, it really makes me quite upset. Here I have another question. Have the Palestinian protesters been charged for encouraging honking and blocking bridges and roadways? I mean, that's happening all over the place. Or I could even add an addendum question of my own, and that is, there's been some 60 churches burned down across Canada, many of those on First Nation reserves. And to my knowledge, there's been no criminal actions taken against them. I mean, it just goes on, doesn't it, John?
Well, there's certainly a double standard with the Crown in Manitoba. That one's, I know about that one.
Okay.
I have no knowledge as to who should be getting charged. But here's the key point. What the Charter protects is the method of protest. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms allows you to protest peacefully. It is not a license to block traffic. It's not a license to close the borders. It's not a license to blockade a highway. So it's the means, but the government should be completely content neutral. Whether you're protesting against racism, Black Lives Matter, for LGBTQ rights, against abortion, for the environment, for Israel, for the Palestinians, the content should be completely irrelevant. And the only thing that the police and the Crown prosecutor should be looking at is the behavior of the protesters. And if you're not blocking highways and obstructing traffic, if you're not vandalizing property, if you're not blockading borders, then the content, what's your cause, what's your issue, under the Charter is completely irrelevant. But sadly, we're seeing in Canada that no, actually the cause that you're protesting for is highly relevant. And if you're protesting for a cause that the government is sympathetic to, they're going to wave a blind eye, and you can break the law and you can engage in criminal conduct. But if you're protesting for a cause, say anti-lockdowns or anti-vaccine passports, if the government doesn't like your cause, you're going to end up behind bars like Tamara Leach and Chris Barber.
I think that point is spot on, John, and it's very concerning. And this is, and no offense to Banana Republics, but this is Banana Republic territory, isn't it? Where you kind of are going after, again, political opponents. You're not exercising the rule of law and its application in a fair and equitable way. And I think that this is a kind of a downward spiral, is it not? Because then people look at that. I mean, Canadians, I think, are slow to anger. They're very patient, but they're not stupid, and they look at this and they say, "What is going on with these double standards?" And they remember this. I mean, I hear these comments regularly from people. There's a very different attitude towards institutions now, including our courts, which is very concerning because we need confidence and trust that our courts and our other institutions are doing their duty and their job, but they're not. So are you concerned that there's an erosion of trust and confidence in those institutions now?
Well, very much so. One of our court cases we have raised, we're awaiting a decision, but in one of the Justice Centre's court cases, we raised the issue of the freezing of bank accounts. I mean,
Yes.
that really made us a banana republic with polar bears.
A laughing stock.
It's just outrageous. There is good legislation on the books that makes it illegal to fund or finance terrorist groups, and that's a law that should be there and it should be enforced. What we had here was the Prime Minister and Cabinet deciding that they didn't like the peaceful protest in Ottawa. And I don't think anybody disputes, even people who are 100% pro-lockdown, pro-vaccine passports, nobody disputes that the protest in Ottawa 2 years ago, there was no arson, there was no violence, there was no uttering threats, there was no criminal activity there. It was a peaceful protest. And then suddenly there were hundreds of Canadians, I think the number was about 216 individuals, have their bank accounts frozen and their insurance policies frozen. They can't buy groceries, they can't drive. And without due process, those 216 people, they had no opportunity to say, excuse me, no, here's why, there's nothing wrong with what I've done. No opportunity to defend themselves, suddenly find themselves frozen out of their bank accounts. That has also done massive damage to Canada's reputation economically as a safe place to invest. So these are the kinds of cases that there's Justice Centre is taking on, and we await a decision on that court case where we have raised the freezing of bank accounts as one of the issues in that case.
You're right on. John, I'm it was a very dark time in our nation's history, and let's hope that we can work together collectively to wake up, open our eyes, and see what we can see while we can still see it, and not take our rights and freedoms for granted. So this has been a really quite a animated discussion, as it was on the release that was made this Tuesday. So if you haven't seen it, be sure to listen to it. We'd welcome your feedback. We're kind of in the home stretch, and I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about, John, is if we're also at a turning point from the point of view that we have learned so much, even the last year in 2023, about the degree of censorship and knowing censorship by governments. I say this repeatedly, but when Elon Musk bought Twitter, when it was Twitter, he bought a crime scene. And the release of the Twitter files, and I know you've watched this closely as well, John, has been an enormous revelation. And we found out further files where decision makers in the government, in the US government, also attached to the Five Eyes agreement, including Canada, knowingly censored all kinds of information. And they knew that they were doing this. I mean, that's what they were doing in a very heavy-fisted manner, as they threatened social media, said, well, if you don't censor this along these narratives, and it was on every topic imaginable, whether it was about COVID-19, whether it was about the vaccines, it was about all kinds of topics. If they didn't toe the line, these social media companies risked losing their license, their whole livelihood. So they fell in line. And I think that was a revelation for me, is the degree of censorship across this board. And it matters to Canada from many different respects, because most Canadians now get their so-called news and information through social media, right? They don't even get it through mainstream media. They get it through social media. And so this was, I think, a real revelation. And one of the things, though, with that kind of research has been the release of the so-called Pfizer documents. There was a massive research undertaken by a bunch of heroes, citizens, and scientists. A number of them are Canadians. Do you think that the reality that those Pfizer documents that have been released that were suppressed by these governments is going to open up a whole new age of vaccine injury lawsuits that will just blow this whole thing to bits, John?
Well, first of all, I've not personally read these Pfizer papers, but
Mhm.
they should never. Nothing should be suppressed when it comes to science and other fields. I mean, whether it's art, poetry, politics, philosophy, religion, we can learn from listening to each other and considering views. And when the government steps in and says that certain views are not allowed, it effectively destroys the debate. I was saddened by the revelations about Twitter, but not surprised, because we saw this from the get-go when, give you an example, in Alberta, the chief medical officer, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, she said very early on that her lockdown policies were evidence-based. And that's simply false. It was a brand new experiment. The honest thing to say would be, we've never before in human history tried to lock down an entire society for prolonged periods of time. We don't know if this is going to work well or work poorly. We're going to be evaluating the evidence coming in as to what benefits there might be, what harms there might be.
Yes.
That the honest thing to say would be, this is a brand new experiment. There's no evidence for it or against it. We're trying it for the first time.
Sure.
But the fact that she got up, at a news conference and said that her lockdown policies were, quote, evidence-based, that's a sign of just how rotten and lacking in intellectual integrity that whole project was. So it's again, it's sad, but it's not surprising. This is the last point that's relevant on this. This is why we have to think about other regimes. We have to look past the superficial differences between a repressive regime that is theocratic versus fascist versus communist versus socialist versus Nazi versus whatever. You have to look past these superficial differences and look at the core. And the core is a government that does not respect your human rights and your charter freedoms of expression and conscience and religion and others.
No, I agree, and it's a very profound kind of revelation, because in Canada's case, people are so busy trying to go about their work, trying to make a living for their family, and I'm concerned that we invite Canadians to realize that if a government plays so loosely with such a disrespectful attitude towards vaccinating your person, like these vaccines were experimental. I mean, every scientist knows that.
They were in clinical trials until 2023.
I mean, it's outrageous. And I, by the way, I did get vaccinated. When I looked at the best information I had, it was, one that I certainly do have many profound second thoughts about if I knew what I know now. But if you look at a government that's willing to push out such a product and inject it into your body, I mean, your bodily autonomy is sacred. And so somebody is injecting things into your body and you're consenting to that. Can you really consent morally if you don't even know what it is that's going into your body, John?
We have the Nuremberg Code, which emerged from court rulings after the Second World War, when Nazi doctors were put on trial for having forced Jews and political prisoners and all kinds of people were forced into medical experiments. And the Nuremberg Code is not part of the law of Canada as such. However, the key principle that emerged is fully voluntary, fully informed consent. Of course, those two are linked together, because if you're not fully informed, it's not truly voluntary either. And so it's just very sad to see the blatant violations of the core principle. Again, it's not a statute, it's not a provincial or federal statute. It's not formally incorporated into law, but it's a basic moral principle that until 2021 was universally respected, and suddenly it was basically tossed into the garbage can and flushed down the toilet by people who otherwise, are big supporters of bodily autonomy and other human rights. And suddenly, nope, you don't. We're going to violate this right to. If you're a student getting threatened with expulsion or suspension from university if you don't get injected, that's obviously there's no voluntary consent there. The same with people. I was talking this morning with one of our clients that has been lost his job in October of 21. This has been like 2 years and 3 months of unemployment over not getting injected with COVID vaccine. So yeah, it's very sad to see the blatant violation of a core moral principle that we had respected until 2020.
Well, it's a very powerful summation, John. And what shocks me as well is we have learned so much now about COVID-19, the virus. We know so many of the things that were asserted are not at all accurate again and again. And what amazes me is that, pardon me, in so many circles within Canada, the people leading these efforts, many of them medical officers of health, various political representatives, have not, frankly, risen to the occasion. And in light of the information that we know now, brought a tone of graciousness, brought a tone of forgiveness, and being able to say, you know what, we are going to learn from the lessons of people in Denmark, for example, who last year, I believe, came together, representatives from both government, academia, and media, and apologized to the Danish people and said, you know what, we did not really do our job. And too often we suppressed debate and discussion, and we learned a lot through this crisis. And one of them is that in order to go forward, there needs to be truth and a word that you hear so often in other contexts, a time of reconciliation, a time of healing. And this is the question that is certainly very much on my mind, is that this kind of time of forgiveness, truth, and reconciliation needs to be very much on the agenda for 2024, and even accountability. Because what was done to people's lives across this country, to even children, to lock them away from school and opportunities when their risks were virtually zero, is unconscionable. It was immoral, and this is my opinion, and I know that you would be sympathetic to that opinion as well, John. But I think that this is something that we need to be working together when it comes to the implementation of law. When these prosecutors become persecutors, our country's in trouble, is it not, John?
It's very aptly put. When prosecutors become persecutors, we've got a serious problem. I think that I'm going to look up the Danish example. That fascinates me. I'd not heard about it previously, but I'm going to look that up online. But there's no harm in and there's only good that can come out of people saying, look, we look back on it and we made mistakes. And I think in some cases they were innocent mistakes on the part of people doing the best they could. But it wasn't. I hate to say this, and I don't know if this interferes with the valid goal of reconciliation. But some of these mistakes were not innocent. I saw a video clip of the Prime Minister just recently talking about how it was so important to protect children from COVID. Because children have a right to life or whatever. It's like we knew in 2020 that children were as likely to die of COVID as they were to die of lightning strikes. I know there was one case in Ontario of a 14-year-old girl, but and it's very tragic. In the same way, it's very tragic when a child dies from a lightning strike. But you don't destroy people's lives and drive people into drug overdoses and unemployment and poverty and depression and despair and loneliness. And you don't harm the economy and lay the foundation for massive inflation. You don't do all those things to prevent children from dying from lightning strikes, nor do you do it to prevent children from dying from COVID when they knew the numbers back in 2020. So unfortunately, it's not all innocent.
Exactly. So the discussion will continue. My friend John Carpay, president of the Justice Center. It's been a very meaningful discussion today, and I want to thank you and all the incredible work that your team do every day to advocate and promote rights and freedoms. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us and for those questions, and also for the role that we all play as Canadian citizens, as we do not take rights and freedoms for granted. So we encourage you to speak up, contact your elected officials, do what you can do to promote our rights and freedoms so that Canada can be a bright place in 2024. So be sure to join us next week, this same time on Thursday, 1 o'clock Mountain Time. And as we have two enlightened leaders of our public policy, and that is constitutional lawyer Leighton Gray, as well as the president of the Frontier Center for Public Policy, Peter Hawley. So do not miss that barn burner of a discussion. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And that brings our conversation to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, David.